Okay, hello everybody. My name is Matthew Burton, professor of game design here at Webster University. I'm currently in Geneva, Switzerland, where we now offer game design courses. So if you're in St. Louis, be sure to come to Geneva, take some courses with me and Francesco, or Geneva students, make sure you go to St. Louis at some point, take some courses with Mike and I. So today we have a very special guest, Mike Breault. But first I'm going to introduce Francesco, who runs the media communications program at Geneva, Switzerland. So Francesco, would you like to say a few words?
Yeah, just very quickly, I want to thank you and Mike to be here. We feel proud and happy to be part of the game design program. Slowly, step by step, we started talking about these more than a year ago at this point. So seeing things that when it happen, it's amazing. So thank you very much for being here, to both of you, and to organizing all these webinars.
Absolutely. Cool. Thanks, Francesco. So our special guest, Mike Breault. Mike is an assistant professor of game design here at Webster University. So him and I work very closely to facilitate the game program. But before working with Webster, Mike was a game and narrative designer for some huge titles, including The Elder Scrolls, Far Cry, and Call of Duty. So Mike is going to share some insight into his career path as a game designer working in the video game industry, and then discuss some tips on getting started as a narrative designer for games. So Mike, thank you for being here, and I will turn it over to you.
Okay. Thanks, Matt and Francesco. Hey, everybody. First of all, I want to apologize for the scheduling conflict with the FIFA game. We tried to get FIFA to delay the game, but they, for some reason, weren't willing to. But anyway, other people can, watch this on video and get whatever information there is we have to convey. So as Matt said, I'm an associate professor at Webster. And whoops, I'm sorry. I need to get my share screen thing here going.
Okay.
And I've been in the game industry since 1984, working on games. And let's see if I can actually share here. Do you see that, Matt? My little presentation.
I sure can. Okay. Yeah, that's great.
Let me see if I can actually full screen it. Here we go. So I've been working on games since 1984. I've got about 90 analog games, that's role-playing games and board games and card games under my belt, and 40 or so digital games, computer and video games. And almost all my work was as a game designer and narrative designer. I did some scripting and even a tiny bit of level design that I wasn't very good at, but mostly game design, narrative design. And now I'm an associate professor of game design at Webster. And I just want to talk about, my role here is to talk mostly about narrative design and the role of the narrative designer in game development. This is what my wife calls my ego wall. These are the games that I've worked on over my career. And let me see. I kind of want to share something here. Can you see this new screen, Matt?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay. On Board Game Geek, there's a list of the games I've worked on. And there's computer and video games, strategy guides, some board games, and then a whole bunch of role-playing games over the years, going back to 1984. So that's me. And the thing about working on a game with a professional team is every game is different. Even if it's, Dragonlance number 6, you go to Dragonlance number 7, completely different team, different process, different story, different game. So I learned a lot from all these various projects, and that's what I try to convey to my students. And if anybody ever wants to see that list, you could email me. Back down the bottom right there is my email address, michaelbreaux50@webster.edu. If you have any questions, feel free to email me or, talk to Matt and get my address from him. And I'm happy to answer any questions anybody has about narrative design, the game industry, anything like that. Anyway, so there's my ego wall. I also, a couple of years ago, wrote a textbook about narrative design that was published by CRC Press. And you can find it on Amazon if anyone was ever interested. It's mostly about narrative design, but it's also got a bunch of game design there. So I just want to kind of talk about careers. And this is the kind of career that most people have. You're shot out of the cannon, out of the college, university canon, and you rise in your field, you reach a peak, and then kind of you retire and then you blow up. That's a normal career for most people. And that's probably the career you all will have. My career looked like this. This is an image of something called Brownian motion, which if you take a cup of tea, or a hot cup of tea, and you look at one of the molecules in it, one of the tea molecules, it just bounces all the heck around. And that's the way my career went. I started out, I got a bachelor's degree in physics. I went into the astrophysics PhD program at Indiana University. After a few years, decided that wasn't for me and I wasn't for it. And I became an editorial intern at a magazine. And I spent about 9 months there. And then the magazine has a Chicago Cubs baseball game every year. So we went up there, and my wife happened to spot an ad for a game company, a game editor, and she didn't recognize the company, but it was TSR, the company that makes Dungeons and Dragons. And I recognized them because I'd played D&D in college. And so I went to TSR, stayed there for 5 years. Toward the end of my time there, I got a chance to be a co-designer on the first Dungeons and Dragons computer game, Pool of Radiance, AD&D, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons game. And that gave me the digital game bug. So after a year later, I left TSR and started working in the digital realm. And so the 40 or so digital games I've worked on came from basically 1988 on, and most of the analog games I worked on came from 84 through like 89 or 90. And then about 6 years ago, I started getting into teaching. I left the game industry. I left working full-time in the game industry and started working as an adjunct, a part-time instructor at a few colleges, and then started working full-time at University of Texas at Dallas. And then 5 years ago, I came to Webster, and I've been here ever since. And I really enjoy teaching. It's a lot of fun to convey the things I think I've learned in the course of my career to students, and see students getting into this really exciting field, and something that, they all play games, they want to make games, and it's a great transition for a lot of students from something they love, turning that into a career. And I find that really exciting. And so right now I'm teaching. I'm also working on 3 board games. And one of the points I want to make is about one of the board games. It was an idea I posed to TSR back in 1986, and they passed on it for good reasons. It was probably politically incorrect at the time, but I still kept that idea. And one of the 3 board games I'm working on now is based on that idea. So one of the messages I give my students is hang on to everything you do. Every concept you come up with, every game design doc you do, every prototype you do, keep it somewhere, all that work, keep on a flash drive somewhere, because you never know when it might come in handy. Something else I worked on, a proposal I had that I made in like 1993 to a digital company. I reused about 20 years later when applying to another company. I just kind of refurbished it and, brought it up to date and, presented it to another company. So keep everything you work on. That's kind of my first lesson there. This guy, Malcolm Gladwell, and when you're in various industries, you end up working with people who become famous later. Malcolm Gladwell is a famous writer. He's worked for the New York Times and the Atlantic. He's published probably a dozen books, some of which you may have heard of. He and I were editorial interns together at that magazine back in 1983. And then he later went on to be this big writing star. But so you never know, people you work with, people you go to school with may end up being, famous. Anyway. So one thing I tell all my students in my narrative classes and game design classes is a narrative designer is a game designer who writes. So when you're a narrative designer, think of yourself as a game designer first, and then a writer second, because everything you do in narrative design affects the game design that you're working on. Here's basically what a narrative designer does on a game design team. One of the cool things about being a narrative designer is that on a game design team, and I've worked on teams, the smallest team I've worked on has been 25 people. The biggest has been 450 people. And that was Elder Scrolls Online and another MMO that I worked on, a massively multiplayer online game like World of Warcraft. The cool thing about being a narrative designer is that on a game dev team, just about everybody kind of gets really focused and buried in a task. And then they move on to the next task and the next one. Like a programmer will be writing some code for something to happen, a character to be able to do something, or writing code for the user interface, right? They're really focused on a section, a piece of that whole game design. And the same thing for animators. They're animating one character for weeks, or artists, they're creating a character or trees or something in the game. Virtually everybody on a game design team, a game development team, is focused on some narrow part of the game. There are only really two people who have an overall vision of the game. And the main one is the creative director. That person, it's their vision that the game development team is working to create. But they also have, a lot of responsibilities. They're at least partly a manager. They're in meetings all the time. So the narrative designer becomes the creative director's point person in the game. They have to keep a vision of the entire game. The whole story goes across the whole game. So they're telling a story, they're coming up with characters, but they have to keep track of how all that stuff is being put into the game. And so the narrative designer is someone who has this overall vision and interacts with virtually everyone on the team at various points. Maybe every day you're interacting with a dozen different people or 30 different people. And so this list here, these are the things that narrative designers do on a game dev team, and sometimes they're doing them every day. And the ones highlighted in blue, those are the ones I work on with my students in my narrative design classes. And that a lot of that stuff is basically pre-production. These are students creating individual game designs. And so they're not creating the games yet, but they're just setting the groundwork. They're laying the foundation that what I tell my students in narrative design classes is this document, this game design document you're creating, you should, by the end of the semester, be able to hand it to a game dev team and work and walk away. And those developers will be able to create the game that you're envisioning. I just saw the chat. Whoops. Whoa, I messed up there. Sorry about that. I just saw the chat someone put about love GDDs. I love GDDs.
Justin Thornhill, in case you didn't catch the name.
Oh, no, I didn't.
Yeah, it's
Hey,
Justin.
Justin. Nice
Hello.
to see you, Justin. Nice to not see you, or sort of see you. Justin graduated last year, right?
Yes.
He did.
Yeah. Hey. Yeah, J Thor. Okay, now I get it. So game design docs are the foundation upon which a team begins production of a game. And then, they quickly come up with a bunch of stuff that's not in the GDD, because you've got a whole bunch of creative people working for a couple of years. MMOs take like 6 years, and they're coming up with new ideas all the time. So that game design doc is just the starting point, but you need that starting point to get everybody on the same page, everybody pulling in the same direction. So that's what students do in my narrative design class. They come up with a game design doc and a bunch of ancillary documents for it. I have them write cinematic scripts, little mini movie scripts. They write short stories. They write quest documents. And a lot of times, quests or missions or tasks, the narrative designers help the game designers come up with those. Sorry, I'm getting a little dry here. And so that's part of what we do in my class here, for narrative design. And so the stuff in blue is what we work on in my class. All the rest of the stuff is what happens for a narrative designer on a game development team in the industry. And some of those things are exciting to work on. Some of them are kind of a drag, but they're all necessary. And all those things go into making a game. And this is a video game I'm talking about here. Analog games don't require anywhere near this many steps and people and disciplines. So one of the things I talk to my students about in my narrative classes is what stories do for games. Why have a story? And really, every game has a story of some sort. To just use an analog analysis, analog game, chess has a story, right? The story of chess is two kingdoms are meeting on a battlefield, and they're going to, essentially fight to the death, or until one of the kings gets killed or captured. Every game has a story of some sort, and stories in digital games and analog games do a number of things. One is their primary goal is to support gameplay. Players are playing a game to play, right? They're not there to have a story, to listen to a story. If they wanted that, they'd go watch a movie or read a book. So the story needs to support gameplay. It's secondary to gameplay in almost all games. So it supports gameplay. It kind of, helps create that illusion of being in that game world and kind of going through that story and being a part of the story of the game. It also gives context to the player's actions. We need to tell the player, why is the PC here? Who is the PC? The player character. I'm sorry. PC is player character. Who is the player character? What are they doing? Why are they doing it? And how do they fit into this story that's ideally feels like it's going on all around them, and it's, encompassing maybe the whole world or just a section of the world. Why is the player here? What are they doing? And the story gives that to them. Another important role that stories play is they're a great way to maintain player engagement. If you think about all the work that goes into a digital game, and then think about all the work that goes into adding a new character or adding a new game mechanic. Like if, you're there playing this game and you've chopped the head off the 1000th orc that you've met, that kind of gets old. But to introduce a troll into the game, the game designer has to come up with information for the troll, and then a concept artist draws a sketch of the troll, and then an artist creates a model of the troll, And then a rigger goes in and puts the bones in that troll so it can move. Animator does the animation for the troll. If the troll has special abilities, programmers get involved in making those special abilities happen. Combat designers decide how that troll acts, what it does, how it acts in combat and all that stuff. There's a lot of work in getting a new character into a game to keep the player excited about the game. If you wanted to add a new game mechanic, like players got a sword, but now you want them to be able to fight ambidextrously. They find a spell that enables them to be ambidextrous. All of a sudden, you've got more art, you've got more animations, you've got more code. It's a huge deal to add those additional things into a game to keep the player engaged, to keep the player wanting to keep going in that game. But story is a really cheap way to keep players want to keep playing. If you've got a good story that the player's really engaged in, they want to keep playing just to see what happens around the next corner, just to see, where they go next and what happens next. And that's a really good way to keep players engaged. Even if they get sick of chopping the heads off orcs, they want to keep playing that game. And that's something the story can do for the team. It can take, in a sense, take some of the pressure off, all the other disciplines, because they don't have to come up with new characters or new game mechanics to keep the player engaged. The story does that. The story gets the player wanting to keep going. That is, if it's a good story. If it's a bad story, then it doesn't help you at all. But we'll just think about good stories here. In one way, storytelling differs in games. If you think of all the different media that stories are told in, they're almost all very linear. Storytelling evolved around, a campfire, and some elder would tell a story to, kind of give a message to the younger people, or just tell some of the history of the tribe. But that story was a very linear thing. It went step by step by step from scene to scene to scene. And novels are linear, and they're based on words, and it's a passive experience. The player isn't interacting with the novel in general, unless it's a little like like a game novel where you can pick your path, something like that. So it's generally, or almost always, passive. Movies, they're from a script, very, very linear, and it's delivered by actors, and you get dialogue and events and visuals. But again, it's a passive experience. The audience sits there and watches it. Same thing with theater, right? The audience, I know you can have interactive theater, but generally the audience watches a play, and the play happens the same way it's happened thousands of times before, very linear, and it's delivered to a passive audience. But stories in games, good stories in games, are the player is an active participant. They're very involved in that story. And if you do your job right as a game development team and a narrative designer, the player feels like they're creating that story with you. They're driving that story. They're determining the direction of it. They're deciding where they go and when they do various things. And that's what a good story will do. It gets the player feeling like they're creating that story with you. And it's an intense activity, and you don't want the story to overwhelm the gameplay, because players are there to play the game, but you want that story to fit right into the gameplay, to really meld the gameplay and all the visuals and audio, meld it into a coherent experience for the player that's very exciting and wants them to keep going. And really the best stories, in my opinion, the best stories are non-linear, where the player has choice, ideally a lot of choice about when to do various things, and where to go. And I think that's a great goal for stories and game development teams, is to give the player agency, give them as much choice as possible. And as a narrative designer, as I mentioned earlier, you need to recognize that story isn't the player's focus. It's gameplay is the player's focus. And I've seen people come from the movie industry. People come from novel writing and try to get into the game industry, and they just have a hard time because they're always thinking of the story as theirs. It's their story, and they're telling it the way they want to, but that's not the way it should work in games. You should always be aiming to make it the player's story, to make it something the player feels like they're crafting that story. You know, you've provided the foundation for them. You've provided the kind of the means for them to tell that story, but it's their story to tell. I have kind of a slightly funny story. I was the narrative designer and game designer on a game called Red Faction, which was a while ago. It was a first-person shooter set on Mars. And you were this miner, and you led this revolt against the oppressive corporation that was, you know, doing naughty things to the miners. And, you know, there was a big story and lots of characters involved, and, you know, this sort of like very uplifting, you know, adventure that the player had in it. And we put the game out, and it did great. You know, it had like 89 or 90% ratings and sold, I think, overall like 8 to 9 million copies in various platforms. But, you know, we put it out, and then someone pointed out to me, hey, look, there's a forum there where someone says Red Faction, best game story ever. And so I went into the forum, and the original poster wrote, you know, Red Faction has the greatest story ever. You run around, you slap these mining charges on guards, and they run around screaming, and then you blow them up. Best story ever. And that was what that person got out of the game. They just ran around and slapped mining charges on guards, and we had guards, they were programmed to freak out when you slapped a mining charge on them, and then they'd run around and you'd blow them up. And that was what that person got out of that story. So that was kind of an eye-opening or humbling experience for me. And it really told me the story is the player's story, whatever they want to make of it. And you're just providing context for them. You're providing, ideally, an interesting, exciting world for them to explore. And they're going to make of that story whatever they make of it. And that was something that helped me realize I needed to let go of the story and write a story, make it exciting, and then players can do with it as they will. And, you know, you may have that same experience where people you work on this game for 2 years, and you think it's got the greatest art ever or really cool animations. And people just talk about listening to birds or, you know, something that was totally not your focus. You never know what players are going to focus on. And so you just do the best you can, give them the best world, and let them make what they can of it. So that's kind of a fun thing to discover. Games are not yours. Games belong to the players, really. And you're making games for players, and just let them do with it what they will. Okay. So I've already kind of, in my rambling, I've already kind of made these points. Game stories support gameplay. Except in maybe some role-playing games, players are there for gameplay, not story. Sometimes in role-playing games, story is the focus. And when you realize that story isn't the focus for most players, it's gameplay, what you need to do is, you can tell a deep story, but you need to layer it. So you've got a basic story that everybody experiences. You know, you have to go from point A to point B to point C. Each of those points, something happens, something exciting, ideally. People are met, bits of the story are delivered to you, but it's just kind of a basic story. And then each of those points, you have other people, non-player characters that the player can talk to, that they can get a deeper story. They can find out more about that local area, or some exciting quest that they can do that's not part of the main story, but it's kind of a little story quest that'll let you find out more about the people or place that you're in. And so you layer that. So there's a bunch of optional stuff players can do for players who are really interested in story, really interested in exploring the world that they're in. you give them that ability, but also for the players that just want to go out there, kill things and take their treasure, you give them that basic story, because they're not there for story. They're there to have fun, and story isn't part of their fun. But you need to satisfy all those players, the ones who really want a deep story and the ones who just want gameplay, and story is just a means to get from place to place. And again, as I said earlier, player agency to me is really important. To make an interesting story, you need to give players choices. They need to feel like they're part of this story. Ideally, that they're driving the story and creating it with you. That to me is the goal. And a lot of games don't meet that goal, but that's always been my focus in games. And again, game stories don't belong to the writer. And as I said earlier, that's something for writers who are coming from other industries. That's something that's really hard for them to let go of. And a lot of them end up leaving the game industry because they just can't deal with the story not being theirs and them not dictating every point of that story. So as a narrative designer, you really have to let go of that story. It's something you're working on. It doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the player. It belongs to the game. It belongs to the team. It belongs to the audience. And everyone on your team affects the story, the story from the player's viewpoint. Narrative designer has this story, but every animator who's animating a character, the way that character moves can really affect the way the player views that character and views that character's place in the story. The programmers, game designers, level designers, artists, every person on the team affects the story because they're creating this experience for the player, and it's all wrapped in together, and the story is kind of the icing on the cake, and everybody gets to dabble a little bit in that icing. And I want to give a little bit of, I don't know, well, let me just say, a lot of times game stories get a bad rep. The story doesn't hold together. The story, doesn't make sense. There's this big gap in it, a big hole in it. And part of the reason that happens is that every day on a project, every day the game is changing. The game's, the game design is changing. New things are getting added. Things that are already in there are getting taken out. That Red Faction game that I mentioned earlier, I was doing scripting and game design and writing on it. And with 3 weeks to go before we published, it was decided by the creative director and producer that the first level wasn't where they wanted it to be. So they ripped the entire first level of the game out, and we had to redesign it and redo it. And there were some holes in the story because, you write all these lines for characters and they get voice recorded. You fly out to LA, Los Angeles, and you do the voice recording, and then those lines are locked in. And so any changes that occur after that point, the voice lines may not make sense. And one of the things I tell my students about writing a game story is, imagine you take a puzzle and you flip all the puzzle pieces over onto their fronts. So you've got the blank backs, and you write a word on each back, and then you put the puzzle together and you flip it over again to the back, and you hope that it makes sense. Because pieces are coming and going, and levels are getting dropped out of the game, whole sections are getting dropped out, and it happens. And that's part of the reason why sometimes game stories just don't hold together, and you find these big gaps. It's because the writer is part of a team, and that team, everybody on that team is changing the game every day. And the writer's kind of juggling all these plates and trying to keep up with all the changes. And so that's my excuse for why sometimes game stories aren't the best. Sometimes it's because the writer really sucks, but Other times it's because, hey, stuff happens, and it happens every day in a game development project. Some of my students, probably 10%, 15% of my students want to be a narrative designer. And, they want to know what they need to be able to do, what skills they need to be a narrative designer. First of all, you need writing. You need to be able to write well. You need to be articulate. And writing well really means writing very concisely and not overwriting. And that's something that you redo your writing all the time. Writing is editing, essentially. Writing is rewriting is a phrase. You also need experience working with game engines. In my career, I've worked with a whole bunch of game engines, but every single one of them was created by the programmers at the company I was at. So I never worked with Unity or Unreal. They rolled all their own game engines. And you need experience working in game engines, because as a narrative designer, you're expected to get lines into the game and get characters into the game and have those characters doing stuff and interacting with each other. So you need to be able to work in game engines. And like Matt's introductory class there, I don't know if Matt uses, you don't introduce Unity, right? Yet?
Yeah, we're using Unity in the intro class, and then the next step, Unity in both Unity and Unreal.
And that's great. That's a great experience to have if you want to be in the game industry in any discipline. Being able to work in a game engine is important. And Unity and Unreal, and even the home-rolled game engines that I worked on, they have a lot of the same functions. They just call them something different. They're under different tabs, and things look a little different. But once you know Unity or Unreal, you can work in the other pretty easily. It's just a little bit of a change up for you. Perseverance is something narrative designers and anyone who wants to be in the game industry, you need to have perseverance. And basically that means it's going to take you a while to get into the game industry. It's a hard industry to break into. You need to get not discouraged, keep applying for jobs, just keep at it. It takes a while, but I've seen lots of students succeed at getting into the game industry after, it takes them a while, 6 months or a year. It just takes a while to get in. People who are published in other media, if you're a novel writer or a script writer, you can look for full-time and contract work. It's easier for you because you're a published writer. For students just out of college, and which probably includes most of the people here, no matter what discipline you're in, one of the things I tell all my students is apply for every job in your discipline. If you're a programmer, apply for all those jobs. If you're an animator, apply for those. But when you look at the required skills or requirements for a job, the game industry wants experience. They'll say, needs 5 years of game industry experience, or needs 2 AAA projects under your belt. Apply for those jobs anyway, because you lose out on 100% of the jobs you don't apply for, and they may not get any applicants with that type of experience. So you might look pretty good even as someone without much experience. But to become a narrative designer and any position in the game industry, I always tell students, go for QA. That's quality assurance. That's playtesting. That's the biggest pipeline into the game industry. Because when you're applying for quality assurance, you don't need any experience working on games. What they want is experience playing games and being able to talk about those games, what you liked about a game, what you didn't like, what you might have told the developers if you were QA for that team, to be able to think about games and convey your thoughts about games. That's what game companies want for QA people, quality assurance, playtesters. And then once you're in as a QA person, you're internal to that company. You're getting game industry experience. And if you want to be an animator, when an animation job pops up at that company, you're an internal candidate. They already know you. You know, they've worked with you. They ideally like you. And that's incredibly important to have worked with someone. So many of the jobs I've gotten in the game industry were because there was someone at that company that I had worked with before, and they could vouch for me. And, you know, if you're in QA and you've been interacting with those animators or artists or programmers, when a job comes up, you've got a really good leg up on getting that job. Even if they're looking for someone with 5 years of experience, you've been at that company for a year, they know you, they're gonna, you know, kind of give you a pass on that experience. So get in, still apply for any job in your discipline that you spot, but don't expect to get them unless you get really lucky. But QA is the biggest pipeline into the game industry. And then once you're in there, you can move up into the position you really want. You have to think of it as an apprenticeship. At Volition, which is in Illinois here, I worked there for almost 10 years, and they do the Saints Row games and Red Faction games, and Agents of Mayhem, I think, is a pretty recent game of theirs, a few years out. There was such an upwelling out of QA into all the different positions. You know, they preferred QA people to become programmers or artists or animators or narrative designers, sometimes producers, because they've worked with you, they know you, they like the way you think, and you've got a great in right there. And even if a job doesn't come available at the company you're at, if you see an animation job at another company or a narrative designer job at another company, you've got game industry experience now. You've been QA for a year or year and a half or whatever, and you've been in the game industry, and you know what it's like to work on a team. And that's really important to game companies. So you can apply for those other jobs now and stand a decent chance of being considered for them, getting interviews. So I always tell students, apply for all the jobs in your discipline, but also look for QA jobs, because that's a great way into the game industry. That's kind of my talk here. Sorry. And so if anybody has questions or comments, feel free to turn your mic on and ask away.
I'll go first because it's just a good segue into my comment, but I love the idea of making your first job, right? Apply for everything, especially what you want to do, but QA is your first job. My first job right out of college was in QA, or quality assurance. And it made me realize that I wanted to be a developer and do something more technical. And it was a perfect job to kind of segue into that role, because I was always working with developers, and their expertise and knowledge in programming kind of rubbed off on me, and they taught me a lot of what I know now. And in addition to that, yes, I had that. It wasn't a game design company, but it was a software company, and that helped me work on games going forward. So I couldn't agree more with that comment on, you know, apply for everything that you want, because, you know, something might happen, especially if you're a rock star. But yeah, QA position right outside of college is a great path. And since I'm speaking, I'll ask my question. You mentioned a lot about removing yourself from the game and the story and focus more on like what the audience builds. And I think that's a tough thing for a lot of people to do, to focus on that, because everybody's very proud of their own story. So do you have any tips for starters on kind of making that switch to, you know, this isn't my game, this isn't my story, this is for my audience?
Yeah, let me just address the QA thing very, very quickly.
Sure.
There are so many people I know in the game industry, like the guy who was president of Volition in the last year or so I was there. He started out as QA and rose to be president of the company. Producers, executive producers, you know, lead programmers. So many people just come out of QA and then just kind of rise through the ranks. And it's a great, great start. As far as removing yourself from it. To me, I talk about the balance between ego and pride. And ego is, this is me, this is mine. And pride is pride in the project, pride in the thing that you've helped create. And to me, the proper balance is about 90% pride and 10% ego. You know, you can still feel like, hey, this is mine, but you have to realize that it's not primarily yours. It's primarily the audience's. You're creating it for someone, and unless you want to buy 10 million copies of it and make your company profit, you have to realize that you're trying to get people to buy this. You're trying to convince people that this is for them. This was made for them and they should want to buy it. And one of the ways to kind of tell if you're too involved, I think, is to get feedback from people outside the team. You know, get people, if you're writing the game story, give it to people and see what they, see what ideas they have. And just getting that feedback. And if you find yourself really resisting feedback, then that's a clue that you're just too emotionally involved. You've got too much ego in the game. And so if you ever find that, you've got to step back and look at that feedback and say, hey, this would improve my story. And just be open to feedback. Being open to feedback to me is a way to pull yourself back from this is my game to, hey, these people are part of my audience. Here are things that they are thinking of while they're reading my story or playing my game, playing my prototype. I should, take that audience's suggestions to heart. Because you're not the audience for your game. You're a small part of it, but everybody who may buy your game has something different, some different mix of what they want. Traditionally for games, there are like 4 archetypes of, there's an achiever, someone who really wants to just beat the game and get everything. There's an explorer, someone who wants to explore every nook and cranny, and just meet every person and talk to every person. There's a socializer who, in a single player game, they want to talk to the NPCs and get the non-player characters and get those personalities and find out what everybody's about. And then the fourth archetype is a killer. And that's a player who likes to affect other players' experiences, either positive or negative, right? They're team killers and other people who, 12-year-olds who really like to mess with people. Those are killers, but also players who, you just start out in this role-playing game and you've got like a loincloth and a sharp stick and this glowing paladin riding a flying unicorn comes up and just dumps a whole bunch of stuff at your feet and then flies off. That person is termed a killer because they really want to enhance your game experience. They want you to have fun. And that's a type of killer. But all those archetypes, everybody is some mix of those. In different games, it's different mixes. So you have to think about what's the experience that I'm trying to give my audience and who's going to enjoy this game. And a lot of times it isn't you. You'll enjoy parts of your game, but you need to make the game as much as possible fulfill what all those different players want. And it's just, it's kind of an ongoing battle. And even after, 35 years of making games, I still find myself somebody gives me feedback that I didn't expect, or somebody, offers a criticism that I don't agree with. I find myself like taken aback a little bit. And then I have to stop myself and just say, okay, this is feedback. I need to give it a shot. I need to really seriously consider it. And as the designer, as the creator, you don't have to take all that feedback, but you do need to seriously consider it because the person giving it is part of your audience. And all the people who think like them, if you reject their feedback, those people are going to, have the same thoughts and maybe reject your game. So, I think you just need to be open to feedback is the big way I see of making yourself think more about, this isn't my game, this is the player's game, the audience's game. Just constantly reminding yourself to be open to feedback and listening to other people, because they all have different experiences, they all have different opinions. Playing a game is very much a subjective experience. Some people will love it, some people won't. And you just need to listen to people, I think. And that to me is a big way to get yourself acclimated to the thought of, this isn't really my game. I'm helping create it. I'm going to be proud of it, proud of my part in it, but I'm not going to let my ego stand in the way of making this game better. So I don't know if that long-winded answers your question, Matt, but
Yeah, that was it was really helpful. It almost seems like the more it kind of resonates with you, if it bothers you a little bit, it's almost as it's more helpful. Because you might think otherwise, like, oh no, this part was actually good, but if this is your audience saying it, you need to really listen to it.
right. And a lot of times you can compromise. You got this feedback, somebody really didn't enjoy this part of your game. Okay, we'll kind of meet them halfway,
Right.
and they'll get more out of it. They'll enjoy it a little more, and it won't bother them, because, hey, nothing's perfect, and no game is perfectly aligned with a single person. There's stuff people don't like about any game, and there's stuff people love about it, every game.
Yeah.
If you think about movies, there are movies that get like a 4% rating or something on Rotten Tomatoes. 4% of people liked that movie. 96% of people didn't. You never satisfy everybody, and you never completely satisfy anybody, if that makes sense. Right.
Yeah.
And
Perfect.
so, when you're making a game, you just do the best you can to make as many people as happy with your game as you can. And just to reiterate, that means listening to feedback. And actually, you have to go out and solicit feedback. You have to ask people to read your story or play your game and give you feedback. Don't just wait for people to give you feedback. Go out there and solicit it. And that way, you get feedback faster, and people know that you're interested in their thoughts. And so they're more likely to give you those thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I found it's also really good to get feedback early, and to just do it in general, because a lot of people wait till their game is finished and then get feedback. But the earlier you share it with people, the quicker you can iterate and make a quality game. Like, you learn so much from just sharing your game with somebody. Like, an area that you put a bunch of focus into, some people might just gloss over, and you're like, oh, why did they not see that at all? Or they might not know how to do a simple gesture that you're super used to if it's like a mobile game. So yeah, definitely worth getting feedback.
Yeah. My game design classes, both like the digital RPG class and the analog RPG class and the board game design class, we do pre-production for a few weeks. You come up with a concept, and then you come up with a game design doc. And then 2 weeks later, you bring a prototype in for people to play. And every week after that, your game gets played by different people. And so you get a variety of opinions. And the whole time you're, reacting to feedback, you're, making your game, the first time you bring a prototype in, it's only a partial version of the vision that you have for your game. You've just got, maybe combat in or a little bit of exploration. But then each week you're building out toward that vision that you had, and you're taking feedback you get each week to adjust the things that people, pointed out to you weren't working well. And so in all my classes, you're presenting your work really early on, and you're getting feedback early on. And I tell people, when you're giving feedback, be kind, right? Because, definitely say the things you liked and the things you didn't like, but realize that, your opinion is subjective, and this person is still developing this game. So give your thoughts on what's there, be kind, but, be very direct. And, criticism is fine, as long as you don't say your game sucks. You should stop it and do something else. That's not constructive, but getting that constructive criticism in, getting it early, like Matt said, as early as possible, even on just a piece of your game, even if only combat is working, or you've just got a map that people can explore. Getting feedback on that is really important. And we also get feedback on our concept docs and our GDDs, our game design docs, because getting feedback when something's just on paper, it's just in a document form. If someone can point out something to you that isn't going to work and you can fix that thing, it can save you dozens and dozens of hours of time later on. If someone were to point that out 2 months later, you've sunk a bunch of hours of time into that game, and somebody could have pointed out this thing that's fundamentally flawed with it that could really help you. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was still sharing my screen there, but so getting that feedback as early as possible is great, whether it's an analog game or and one of the courses you guys are going to have here is the intro to traditional game design, analog games. I changed the title to analog game design because traditional games, for our students, traditional games are PS2 games. Those were ancient artifacts that their ancestors played. So traditional didn't make much sense to me. So I thought analog game design, and then we've got digital game design. But anyway, and again, I would like to apologize to everyone about the timing of this between us and FIFA. But it's still 0-0, so you haven't really missed anything. Okay. Anybody have comments, questions? Francesco?
I have a comment, yeah.
Okay.
But first of all, I have to thank you because now I understand why at the end of Space Invaders there's not anything special that you expect to see when you finish all the schemes. You get to the end. There must have been a gap there within the designers and who actually studied the development of the game. And Pitfall as well. I was a bit upset. But anyways, my comment and question is about writing, because you highlighted how important writing is, and I have to say that I noticed how important it is writing for media in general, even for video and photography, more and more recently, because you are not a photographer anymore. You need to be a multimedia person to be published. And so my question is about writing. What would you suggest? Because writing, you mentioned novels, you mentioned different ways of writing. If someone wants to actually get specialized in writing for games, do you think there is a path that has to follow, some tips, or it is just writing at the beginning and then it will come by itself?
I don't think there's any set path. My path was been incredibly weird. Physics, astrophysics, writing for a magazine, and then game writing. I think the path, even after I said there is no path, the path is to get a portfolio site. Get a body of work. Write short stories, write part of a novel, write podcast scripts, write cinematic scripts for a game, write a game design document for a game, write quest documents, write short stories that fit in that game. That to me, if you've got a game design document and you've got short stories that fit in that game world that you're envisioning, and you've got cinematic scripts for the story of that game, that's a package that a game company can look at and say, this person can do the work, because coming up with a game design doc, that's a game design process that writers will often do. Sometimes game designers do it. Sometimes the creative director does it. But a lot of times a narrative designer will do it. So if someone wants to be a narrative designer, I'm happy to provide them with like the work that I think they would need to show on their portfolio site. And it's work that we do in my narrative design class. But getting a body of work up there, you don't have to have that experience. They could hire you just by looking at your stuff and saying, you can write. and you've done this game design doc, and so you think about how your story will interact with the gameplay that the player will experience. And that's what they look for in a narrative designer, somebody who's thinking not just about story, but also gameplay, the player experience. And that having that portfolio that people can access and, you know, look at online, I think is the route in. You know, if you get a game design degree with a specialization in narrative, you know, that's a route in as well. But you know, and it's really hard for someone coming out of college without professional experience of some sort to get a narrative design job. Like if people have played the Saints Row series of games, the person who was the writer on the first Saints Row game, they hired right out of QA. He was in QA at Volition, and he could write, and they saw his writing samples, and they just put him in that narrative designer position for Saints Row. And he's been in the game industry ever since. So, you know, it's hard to get a job in any discipline right out of college. And like I said before, QA is a really great way into the game industry. But having that portfolio, even if you're in at QA, if a narrative design position comes up in that company, you need to be able to show writing samples. You need to be able to prove to them that you can write. So if you have a novel, if you have a movie script or a TV script, you know, any of that can prove to someone that you can write dialogue, that you can, you know, get across characterization, that you can describe scenes, you know, all that work that a narrative designer needs to do on games, you can prove in another medium like movies or podcasts or, you know, anything like that. So.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, any thoughts, questions, comments from the audience?
And again, if people do come up with stuff to ask, if you know, some of you have my email directly, but you can send them to Matt, and Matt can send them on to me if you're there in Geneva. But anything, I'm open to any sort of question about games, game design, narrative design, the game industry, anything like that.
Perfect. Yeah, so everybody who's in my class will review this in our class Wednesday. So I'll share Mike's email, his LinkedIn, and then you guys can reach out to Mike with any questions you might have.
Okay.
Cool. Awesome,
Cool.
Mike. Thank you so much for spending time with us. This was really insightful, really helpful. Yeah, thanks again, and have a great day. Enjoy the soccer matches. And
Okay.
Thank you.
oh, Netherlands, right?
Well, thanks, everybody.
Cool. All right, see you guys.
Take care.
All right.